Hi everyone, my name is Micah Orange. Thank you so much for joining us today at a look into politics through the eyes of Gen Z. I am currently the program intern at College to Congress. I'm also a junior at UW-Madison, double majoring in Spanish and International Studies. I'm also getting certificates in French, Public Policy, and Leadership Studies. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you would like to drop in the chat your name, where you're joining us from, if you're a student, where you're going to school, we would love to hear from you. We're going to take just a couple minutes to make sure that everybody gets signed in and is ready to go before we start our discussion. Alrighty. Thank you so much. If you're just now joining us, we're waiting just a few moments just before we start our discussion. If you are able to, if you'd like to drop your name, where you're joining us from, if you happen to be working remotely, or if you're a university student, what university you're attending, if you'd like to put that into the chat, we would love to hear from you. All right, looks like we have Kiki, who's a grad student from Massachusetts, joining us, working at the Partnership for Public Service. We have Kendall, who's viewing us from New Jersey. That's fun. I bet it's just as cold there as it is in Madison and in Chicago right now. Looks like Kiki's joining us from New York. It's probably just as cold there as it is everywhere else. We've got Zoe coming in from Oklahoma. That's fun. Got another University of Hawaii student joining us, 2 University of Hawaii students. That's exciting. Alrighty, so it looks like we are ready to begin our webinar. We are so excited to hear from our Gen Z panelists today and look forward to taking your questions. As a reminder, today's webinar is not meant to be a policy-centered debate, but rather an open-ended discussion regarding Gen Z's views on politics, the election process that respects the breadth of the political spectrum. And so if you have any questions where you would like to ask our panelists, please place it in the Q&A. It is being monitored. And at the end of our moderated discussion time, we will present the questions to our panelists in the order they are received. Thank you again so much for joining us. And I'm now going to pass off the mic to today's moderated discussion leader, College to Congress founder and CEO, Audrey Henson.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Micah, for doing such a wonderful job. I am so excited that you are all joining us today. We are just 6 days out from one of the most anticipated presidential elections. We asked some of our C2C alum and current C2CU students to join us to give us their insights on the election and, more importantly, what's going to happen to our country afterwards. How do we come back together, and how can this generation be that uniting force? A couple things I want to make sure we're all starting on the same baseline. Why are we doing this, and why is this so important? Well, with early voting and mail-in ballots, we are already seeing the impact that Gen Z is going to have on this election. In fact, they've already outvoted themselves. 18 to 29-year-olds have voted 3 times more already, with still 6 days left, than in 2016. So if you don't think the youth vote matters, then we're about to change your mind today. And I think next Tuesday, you'll see exactly the impact they're going to have. This Gen Z panel is going to give you some perspectives on politics, both at the local and national level, on the electoral process, on the influence of social media. We are seeing social media political activists on TikTok, on Instagram. How is that shaping our viewpoints? And my personal favorite, we're going to be talking about how to bridge the political divide that our country is feeling right now. So without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce you to some of my favorite people in the world, starting off with Onyx Brunner, who was a part of our 2019 class where he interned for Senator Tammy Duckworth. He has a lot of things to be proud of, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, share a little bit about his internship, where he's at now, and where he's from, and how that's shaping his viewpoints. Onyx, take it away.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Hi, everyone. As Audrey mentioned, my name is Onyx Brunner. I am currently an analyst at GCM Grosvenor, alternative investment manager in Chicago. But as Audrey mentioned, I was a participant in College to Congress's 2019 class, and I interned for my Senator Tammy Duckworth. I'm from Chicago. I've always dreamed of returning to Chicago to start off my career, hopefully ending up in public service. And I think that Chicago is kind of this, we kind of have this idea that if you get involved in Chicago politics, then you're well informed, you can be involved in politics everywhere. So it's kind of being from this very politically engaged city is kind of what drove me to participate in College to Congress. Other than that, I recently graduated from Yale University, where I majored in ethics, politics, and economics and French literature. And I'm really happy to participate this afternoon and be in discussion with all these wonderful people. Thank you.
I love it, Onyx. Thank you so much. As you can see, he's smart. He's a fast talker. You got to keep up. This is what today is about. It's about bringing everyone's perspectives. Cindy Ng, who is a part of our C2CU 2020 cohort, we actually just met today. She's already made me jealous because she was sharing that she's in Hawaii and they do classes out on the beach. So Cindy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Aloha everyone, my name is Cindy. I am currently a senior at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm double majoring in political science and peace and conflict resolution, and I'm also minoring in Chinese. And as Audrey said, I do come from Hawaii, which most people don't necessarily think of as being the most politically active state. We unfortunately had the distinction of being the least politically active state in terms of voting. But with mail-in ballots, we have definitely changed that. And this has inspired me to actually pursue a career in politics in our government. I'm especially interested in diplomacy, specifically with our East Asian nations. That's why I'm currently an intern for the Department of State. And I definitely look forward to this amazing panel, learning from my peers on the mainland, and just seeing how my generation can continue to make waves in the political sphere.
Cindy, thank you so much for joining us. I love that you're a C2CU success story. So many students have, just gotten 2020 slapped in the face, doing school remote, having internships canceled, and you are an example that you can really use this time to invest in yourself. Edgar Vasquez, who was going to be a part of our 2020 in-person internship this summer, and of course, we've had to postpone. And Edgar, I'm right there with you, and we're going to make sure you make it in person to DC as soon as it opens. So Edgar, share a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now and where you come from.
Sure thing. I appreciate the introduction. Well, my name is Edgar Vasquez. I live here in the university. I live here in Houston, Texas, and I am a senior at the University of Houston. I'm currently double majoring in political science and philosophy. Like many other seniors, I'm ready to wrap it up, ready to graduate and embark on my new steps. As of being a part of the 2020 cohort, it was unfortunately postponed given the pandemic, and that left me with a feeling of uncertainty this past summer more than anything. But as adversity has pushed all of us to embark onto new paths and lay out the options on the table, I was fortunate enough to take on a new chapter this fall. I am a Civic Voice Archive intern for the Open Environmental Data Project, where we are essentially creating a virtual town hall now that Zoom is available for Congress. Because if there's something we know, is that Congress and law itself is very traditionally based, which means paper-based, compared to a digital actual infrastructure. And I'm currently working towards the modernization of Congress itself. And I'm very excited to be here today and engage in this political discourse with you guys.
Awesome, Edgar. I'm already inspired by what you're saying. For those who are not new to C2C, who know us very well, you would know that the modernization of Congress is one of our top priorities. Earlier this year, before we shut down, I actually testified in front of House Appropriations trying to get our Hill offices better pay, better technology, better benefits, just what Edgar's saying, so they can catch up with the private sector and be more effective and be more efficient. So last but certainly not least, Mikhail Cooper is zooming in from Alabama, a name to remember. This girl is going to be a political strategist all the way up to the presidential level, I guarantee you. Mikhail, tell us what you're up to these days, and tell us where you're zooming in from and a little bit about your internship from last summer.
Well, thank you, Audrey, and thank you everyone for joining in. As Audrey said, my name is Mikhail Cooper. I am coming from Birmingham, Alabama. I actually just graduated from the University of Alabama, where I got 2 bachelor's degrees in marketing and public relations. Last September, right after I came back to Alabama from interning in DC, I started working at a political consulting firm, and I'm currently a senior associate at the political consulting firm here. It's Red Pine Strategies, and we manage anything from a U.S. senator's race to a governor's race to a U.S. House race, all the way down to mayors and city councils and a lot of nonprofits as well. So kind of all over the board, able to give back to our communities as well as make an impact in politics, which I love. And talking about my internship with College to Congress, it's probably like a running joke with all of the College to Congress people that I had a coffee at least every single day of the week. So really tried to make the most of the time that I had in DC and meet as many people as possible and really try and understand what it was like to see both sides of the aisle and to come up with different solutions through that we can all kind of work on and hopefully, better our country as well, which I'm sure we'll get into, but that's a little bit about me. And I look forward to talking with y'all today. Thanks.
Thank you, and we look forward to it too. Whenever you were talking about last summer and all the coffees you were taking, it just reminds me that even though, with C2CU, we're providing this virtual training and we're placing students both in virtual internships and in person, there really isn't a match for that in person because, like Edgar said, so much of politics is still old school. It is getting to build those contacts, getting to build those relationships, getting to see, I would say like behind the curtain, if you will, of how legislation is really made. And so I can't wait for our over 500 students who are on C2CU to get that in-person experience and to really let it shine. So let's kick it off. Onyx, I want to give this first question to you because you talked about, growing up in Chicago and understanding the political climate there. And if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere. So I want to hear in your own words, why do you think elections are so important? How do elections, from either the local all the way to the national level end up affecting everyday Americans, especially Gen Z voters like yourself?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Audrey. I think in the most simplest terms or in the most formal way, elections are our power, right? In a representative democracy, we elect our officials. These officials are making decisions on a variety of things, from what schools are getting funding at the local level, to who's going to have access to healthcare that's paid for, subsidized by the state, who can marry. So there's a variety of things in all aspects of our lives that are affected by who we elect, to city council, to the state house, all the way up to the presidency. So I think that's kind of the most basic reason that elections are really important. Everything that we do is touched by an elected official some way. The regulations surrounding how we can have this phone call right now and, share this on the internet, that is touched by our elected officials. So I think, it's kind of a simple answer. They're very important. I also want to highlight, though, particularly for Gen Z, is that I think, particularly with young people, in my circle, maybe more progressive young people, we're still trying to find our kind of political sea legs in a way. So we're very active. I think there are a lot of people who are active in, organizing, protests, things like that. And I don't want to discount those things. I think that those are really important. But I also think that we also need to, do the other half of the work, engage in elections, both by going to the ballot box and by organizing in the interim so that we're selecting the candidates that we want and thereby selecting the elected officials that we want, so that we can really, progress and make real political change.
Onyx, you bring up a really good point because, I'm a millennial, and whenever social media was first coming about, people would post a lot about voting, but you wouldn't see that follow-up action. I'm curious to hear, Mikhail, from you. How do you think social media is playing a part in voting today?
Throughout college, I did a lot of research on hyperpartisanship in America and how social media has directly affected hyperpartisanship. So if we look at a research study done by the Pew Research Center, you can see that they do it every 10 years. So they did it in 1994, 2004, 2014. You can see that across the political spectrum, people on either sides of the aisle are becoming more politically divided, and the people that are the most engaged are the ones that are the most divided as well. And I think that that can really be highlighted through social media. You can look at echo chambers and things of that nature, where you can literally surround yourself with people with no opposing viewpoints, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I think that's one of the biggest repercussions that we're seeing with social media, is that when you have someone who, let's say you have a person that's my age, 24-year-old, single white female, and we're on social media, college educated, the people that are, that I've been exposed to in my life are fairly conservative. And for me, I have a more conservative leaning feed on social media. However, I've done, probably more than most people would to try and expand the amount of information that I'm taking in. And I don't think that a lot of Gen Z voters are even cognizant of that. And they just surround themselves with other people who have similar viewpoints and don't necessarily realize it. Because I know that where I grew up is very different than where other people grew up and their different lifestyles. So I think that has a big impact on it, and it just basically amplifies a situation that was already going on in America. So now we have this gigantic hyperpartisanship divide.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Mikhail, and I think it's something we can all relate to. I too try to follow different voices, different people, different backgrounds, but still, it often feels like even last night, I could tell very quickly that most of my feed was like pro the new Supreme Court Justice nomination. And so I want to take a quick poll and just ask, like, if you're a Republican, raise your hand, just so we can see like who's in the room, or conservative, Republican, conservative leaning. If you're a Democrat, raise your hand. So we have 50-50 here. So this will be really interesting, because then we also have people from Chicago to Alabama, Texas, and Hawaii. So I think we have a really good glimpse right now on different voters and perspectives from Gen Z. I do want to, kind of dive in further into something Onyx brought up about the protests, and then something you were talking about with social media. How do you, Cindy, let's send this question to you. How do you see the effect of social media on the election? Do you see it being positive or negative? I know I just got a Pandora ad the other day saying that if I don't vote, my friends can look it up and see that. And it kind of, as a former political strategist, I was like, that is some good peer pressure. That might really get people motivated, but what motivates me might not motivate your generation. So I'm curious to hear how you feel about it.
Thank you for the question. So I definitely do think that social media has made this election a lot more exciting and a lot more dynamic. As you said, Audrey, we now have social media companies stepping in, and they're sending us like these little push every now and then. I know when I'm on Instagram, I always have a little notifications like, oh, here are the voting procedures for your state, and share that you vote with this cute sticker. And I think that's really great on one hand, that you're making the process more fun for people, because I think when people think about politics, they often think, oh, you need to know all of these things about these policies. You need to understand all of the finite nuances in order to vote correctly. But people forget that the reason why we vote is because we believe that the changes that we want to see for our nation is going to come through this individual. So it really is more of a value-based voting. And I'm personally of the mindset that I don't know what your life is, and I don't know the experiences that motivated you to espouse a certain view. But I am interested in knowing that process and seeing how did you come to believe in a certain politician, or how did you come to think about this certain policy idea? So on one hand, social media makes that more, it makes it easier to engage in that sense because you can reach so many people. But on the other hand, you do have the negatives where because everyone can just put their opinions out online, there is a little bit less of an accountability because you do have a veil of anonymity if you really wanted to on social media. But also there is a level of peer pressure. If it's the case that I don't, if all of my friends are voting in one way and they're posting about it, then I would feel pressured to also post about it as well because I don't want to be left out. I don't want to be seen as that odd one out in a group. And I really think that's a shame because no one should be ever pressured to vote in a particular way because it's your personal choice. And so I do believe social media has made this landscape just a bit more trickier to navigate while at the same time potentially opening doors to more engaging conversations if we actually allow ourselves to engage respectfully and seriously with those that may not share the same political views as us.
Yeah, Cindy, you know, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying it can really be a double-edged sword. It can be great because it can really motivate people, push it out, make it exciting, grab your friends, take a selfie, make it an Instagrammable moment. But at the same time, if someone feels like, well, I'm not the majority of my friends, they might kind of recluse. To that point, Edgar, I'd be interested in hearing from you, since you are, very involved with this election. Are you hearing from friends or just, other Gen Z colleagues who don't want to vote? And do you hear why? And what are their excuses? And what are they saying?
Yes, actually, I think it's a great problem that we've actually faced in 2016, where a lot of people did not show up to vote. Personally, firsthand, I've seen just out of the community that surrounds me, and particularly the Gen Z community, that they are a bit polarized when it comes to deciding who they're going to cast their vote for. And when it comes to social media, I think that one of the biggest issues that actually comes with the political discourse of who to cast your ballot for is, for example, Facebook. Facebook is dictated by algorithms that go about based on what you like, what you post, and what you comment on. Therefore, that makes the type of content that's presented to you very biased because you will only be presented with the content that you engage with. And rather than getting a diversity of perspectives that contribute to the political discourse, you get the same type of content on and on and on. And when this happens to Gen Z voters, in my personal experience, is that they are either going to be completely for the person that they're going to vote for, or they won't have an opinion given that there's so much content being blasted towards them.
Yeah, that can be really tough. Excuse me, just making sure I muted myself. And it actually makes me wonder, Onyx and Brunner, you guys were a part of our class last year. You took part in a Bipartisan Allies program where we pair our C2CU interns with a mentor of the opposite political party. Do you have any tips or best practices on, one, just how to go about talking to your friends who may disagree without totally ruining friendships? I think it's one of the saddest things we're seeing this year is, that cancel culture is taking over, and people aren't just canceling companies now, they're canceling family members and their friends. So I'd be curious to hear if you, have some trades that have worked for you in the past to respectfully, either disagree or move on, or even respectfully move forward in a conversation while preserving that relationship? Onyx, you want to take that first?
Yeah, so yeah, I had C2C does a really good job at kind of bringing people from opposite sides of the aisle together, and it's something that probably, one of the most valuable things about the program is learning how to engage in a bipartisan fashion. I think that this kind of experience is a little bit different from everyone. I like to approach conversations in a way that I assume positive intent of other people. So Cindy brought up a really good point earlier about how, we don't know why people vote the way that they do. We don't know what experiences they've had that have kind of led them to their determination. So, I think as much as possible, at least in beginning conversations, is just trying to learn a little bit more about people's story, assuming that they, care about society, they care about this country, they want to have a positive impact, and that's what's driving the vote. I will say, and somewhat to link this to the last question as well, why do some people in Gen Z feel a little bit more on the fence about voting? I think that we also need to recognize, though, that there are some hot button political issues. They're perennial, but that are going, very much playing out in the various legislative halls right now that are kind of very existential topics for people. For young folks, for example, anyone that's born since 1995, we've now experienced where we can kind of remember, or we learn a lot about, 2 elections where the person who wins the White House is not the person the majority of Americans voted for. So that's kind of the obvious, more universal way that people can feel alienated from the political system. But also, a lot of things are going on. People really feel like their identities are under attack. And so it's always a little bit of a strange dance that you have to do. Like, you do want to be respectful of other people and you do want to hear these opinions, but we also need to recognize that sometimes people have a lot of reasons for kind of retracting in their, retracting to their different partisan sides. And we need to figure out how can we, everyone, regardless of where you are on the spectrum, kind of figure out how to make everyone welcome and assume that positive intent and show that you care about people beyond, your political agenda.
I mean, that's just incredibly wise advice. Even just listening to it's like, I know it and I'm not doing it. I need to internalize it and do it. I'm sure there are other people here watching that sometimes you can't push, right? Sometimes you have to realize that there's a reason why they don't want to be involved, or this is just not the time for them. Mikhail, I'm curious to hear from you, since you're boots on the ground working in politics this year during this election. How do you feel about whether people are voting or not voting, and the role that social media is playing in it? And how is it ending up, how's it going to end up affecting the results of campaigns?
Well, to start off with, I want to talk about how the decisions that we make on elections, especially, for president and for Congress, as a, Gen Z, millennial, us in the younger generations, we're going to have the most amount of time with those decisions. And so for me, it is more pivotal for us to get out there and vote, because we're going to be living with these policies for the next 60, 70, 80 years. And that's something that whenever I meet someone and they are like, oh, it doesn't matter, oh, I don't care. There was an election here in South Alabama just a few months ago that ended in a tie. And the way that they solved the election and found out who won was they rolled dice. And so when you come, yes, they had to consult the Secretary of State's office. I mean, it was crazy. And you think, wow, if one more person would have gone out to vote that day, whether it be a young person, old person, but if one more person would have gone and exercised their right to vote, then we wouldn't have had to decide who is representing an area of our country based on a piece of dice. I mean, that's literally leaving it up to chance. And, it's these silly stories that you hear and you're like, is that real life? And then you realize, yes, it is. But as far as bipartisanship goes and being able to talk with people across the aisle, I think it's really important to be able to discuss the issue and not attack the person. And that is a really big issue. I think it happens on both sides of the aisle, is you start out and you may be discussing the issue, and then emotions get high, and then the next thing you know, names are flying around, and that's how you have these knockdown, drag out fights that you see on stage. And one thing that I think is really sad in our day and age is I have friends who stop talking to their parents that are Democrats, and their parents are very conservative, and they stopped talking to their parents because they couldn't find a way to communicate with them about politics. And to me, yes, elections are very important, but a relationship with your family and with your friends is also extremely important. And so we need to be able to find a way to communicate what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what the facts are, and be able to communicate that effectively with other people and not take it outside of that conversation. When the conversation is over, and we're still friends afterwards. And I think that's one of the most important things. Whenever I was in DC last summer with College to Congress, I was partnered with a bipartisan ally named Megan. She was fantastic. And we hung out several times, and we did have conversations about politics, but the majority of the time that we were hanging out and talking, it was not about political conversations. It was just building a friendship with someone and building a relationship with someone. And those are the types of connections that are the most important, because you get to see somebody else's viewpoint that's different than your own, and you're able to exchange viewpoints to understand why someone thinks the way they do and what led them to vote for that person. And being able to talk to people that you may not have grown up in the same environment, you may not have the same life experiences, but just really trying to understand where they come from and their story. I know we talk a lot about that, but truly understanding that is how you're able to break down those barriers and keep those friendships and those families and relationships intact. As far as social media goes, as a general rule of thumb, I personally don't like posting a lot on social media, especially when it's polarizing material, because you never know who is on the other side of the aisle that's looking at your post. I've seen some people that will post, if you are a Republican, unfriend me now. Well, I want to still be your friend even though I'm a Republican. And it's those types of things where we read it and you're like, this is the type of thing where we have to be able to still have a conversation with people across the aisle, whether I'm a Republican or you're a Democrat or whatever. We still need to be able to talk with each other.
Well, I know that you guys are the leaders to make that happen. If I could just get you in front of every member of Congress and just give them some tips, I think we'd already be better today. We already have an audience question. Cindy, I'm going to kick this one over to you first, and then Edgar, give you a chance to answer this too. I have a feeling a communications person wrote this because they even gave us some data to start it off with. So, in recent years, university political student organizations have seen an ideological separation in the way that parties identify their platforms, with liberal students focusing on social issues and conservative students focusing on political philosophy. With this in mind, how do you feel the political opinions of Gen Z are crafted? Are those opinions based in promoting social causes, elevating economics, maintaining a party line, or following the lead of other vocal students? Or is it something else totally different that I'm missing? So a lot in there, a big question to unpack. So how do you feel about political opinions, about how political opinions for Gen Z are being crafted? Seems like the heart of the question. Cindy, you want to take that?
Sure. Thank you very much for our audience member that sent us in this question. It's a really important question. And to answer your question, I don't believe there's any one way that you can box a member of my generation into one specific political ideology or one specific political area, because we all take notice of everything that's going on around our world. And especially when it comes towards having the internet. My generation grew up with having information as fast as possible, and we're always trying to digest all of these information that's just coming our way. And so this has broadened us in our understanding of the myriad of different issues that are out there. As you mentioned, some people may have more of an interest towards social issues, while others may have more of an interest towards more political philosophy side. And I think this just speaks that there's a way for my generation, Generation Z, to reach many people, many different types of political ideologies as well, because we're all exposed to it. Um, how excited we are towards one topic, that's a different story, because once again, that relates once more to the values that you have, the experiences that you have, and whatever motivates you to act in a specific manner. So I think my generation is very much shaped by the internet, the volume of information that we're exposed to, but also at the same time, and like Onyx said, I definitely do believe that most people try to think of one another in the most positive manner possible, especially when you're first meeting with someone. And so in that case, then we also are more willing to perhaps get to know someone that has a different view than us. We may be more willing to set up an area in public where it's like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this issue. Let's try to really understand one another. And I think that's the uniqueness that my generation can bring to this dynamic, while at the same time also having their difficulties as well. Everything in life has their pros and their cons. And so, of course, you are going to see perhaps a little bit more polarization right now from my generation, because everyone knows, potentially everyone knows what you're thinking about, and you don't want to necessarily appear wrong, or you don't want to necessarily appear different. And so this can harden some people towards taking more extreme views, towards following the trend just so you're not left out. But once again, if people were willing to engage with one another respectfully, to not try to cancel one another out because we have different views, to actually keep relationships going regardless of how someone thinks politically, I think it's my generation that will have perhaps like the biggest impact on our whole political spectrum, on how people organize as a whole, because we should be more willing and open towards one another. And this means reaching out across the aisle and thinking the best of one another and trying to work based off the values that we each share and seeing if there's a mutual solution that way.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And, Cindy, you brought up misinformation, and we actually have another audience question about that. Edgar, why don't you take this? So, Edgar, how can we, so this is actually from a fellow Gen Zer, how can we as Gen Zers combat misinformation and disinformation as the popularity of conspiracy theorist sites such as QAnon become more prevalent on our perspective and social media feeds? So, with conspiracy theories being accepted as facts now, because you can just make a site and throw it on there, how would you recommend to your fellow peers to combat that and to do it in a way that pushes the conversation forward?
Yes, that's actually a very touchy conversation, more than anything, because it it is up to us to actually choose what content to engage with. And at the end of the day, that's ultimately, I believe, a personal decision to dive into content that you decide to dive into. And when it comes to conspiracy theories or the QAnon content, it seems like they are pushing these sort of concepts to be involved in the current political discourse, when political discourse itself isn't about conspiracy theories. It's either about social issues, policies, and such other matters of the same nature. So when it comes to conspiracy theories being involved into the Gen Z discourse itself, I don't actually see it as a productive form of not only obtaining information, but engaging with it in general.
Yeah, I totally agree. Onyx, I'm going to give you this question because when we caught up last week, you shared that you've been doing some phone banking for candidates, and that's one of the ways that you want to help. So this question says, what tactics are you using to reach out to fellow young people, to your friends, to family members? And do they change depending on what generation they're in? So if you reach out to your family, maybe your parents, is that going to be a different tactic than if you reach out to a colleague or a friend or a past classmate? Can you share some tips on that?
Yeah, I think, maybe how we do a little bit of political outreach is kind of converging as we're all in this remote environment. So when I reach out to all these different groups of people, I kind of send like everyone a text message, or, we're communicating over some kind of electronic medium. But yeah, I've been doing a little bit of kind of engaging with various campaigns. And I think that, phone banking from home is maybe one of the closest ways that we're able to get to somewhat of a traditional electoral political tactic. So I will say that since everyone is so well connected, especially during the pandemic, and even folks in my family who may not have been as, reachable over text message are now more reachable over these electronic media. I've kind of used the same tactic, all the time. Maybe I have a group chat with some friends, have a family group chat. We share different articles, we share different things that we've been engaging with that week. And it also makes it kind of accessible to the note of engaging with different information. When we're so well connected and we have these networks that we can tap into kind of in an instant, we're able to get a lot of different information and see various viewpoints. So I will say I've been, to answer your question, simply been very standard across all of my different networks and communicating.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's because it's 2020. If we weren't in quarantine, then we'd probably go and knock on doors to, reach the baby boomer generation, or we'd probably, pick up the phone, like you're saying, to call people who still have landlines. And then with your friends, you might do the texting or social media groups or WhatsApp groups or whatever it is. But yeah, they're all kind of blending right now, and I'm seeing that too. Mikhail, the next question is for you. In the 2016 election, we saw a revolution of liberal women being elected into leadership and being elected into Congress. When will we see conservative women leadership? When will we see a conservative women revolution in Congress? Is it going to be sooner or later? Do you think it'll even come?
Definitely think it's coming. I hope it's sooner rather than later. I don't necessarily think we can put an exact timeline on it, but that's something that even here in the state of Alabama, we lost one of our conservative women who were in the U.S. House, Martha Roby, and she's being replaced by, well, there's an election right now that we're working on, but the Republican that is running for her seat right now is a man. And, we also lost Susan Brooks up in Indiana. And so it's one of those issues where you see that conservative women are not necessarily running in a lot of these places. And when they are running, there is a lot more money being put to target them negatively than their male counterparts. They are, and women already, when their names are on the ballot, they're 74% more likely to think that a woman's name is more liberal than conservative. So just because you have a woman's name, you are automatically trying to prove that you're conservative. And then I think that it's hard to get women to run over men because, they have to consider their families. Men do too, but I feel like women have more of a soft spot, and they think about it more differently than their male counterparts do. So one thing is we have to find strong conservative women to run. And number two, we need to be able to support those women and make sure that they have the backing from the rest of the conservative movement. For me, I was very excited to see that Amy Coney Barrett was able to be confirmed to the United States Supreme Court, because it just shows that conservative women do have a place here in our political system, and that they can, put their nose to the grind and work hard and be able to be rewarded for that. And so, I would say the NRCC, the NRSC are looking for women to run, as well as baseball players, because the Republicans are not good at the congressional baseball game, but that's an aside. But I think those are probably the two places that they need to look the most for. And women give such a unique perspective on issues, especially conservative women, because whenever we're talking about, certain social issues, certain economic issues, women have a different viewpoint on it than men. Just plain and simple. And I think that if we're able to have different voices at the table then it's going to be more representative of America. And right now, with our current representation, we need to push towards that. In Alabama, we had a lady by the name of Jessica Taylor who ran, and she pulled 4 other conservative women who are running across the country to become like a conservative squad, kind of like what the AOC squad has done as well. And so I think there are people out there who want to run. It's just making sure that everyone else is going to get behind them to support them and to push them over the finish line to make that happen.
Well, I know a conservative woman down in Alabama who should definitely be running in the next few years, and I'm looking right at her. I love that idea of collaboration, no matter, you know, what group you identify with. I think there's power in numbers, grabbing your friends, having these conversations, really, you know, making sure that you're all going to support each other when you take these big steps. For some people, just showing up to volunteer at a political campaign is scary enough. It's just as scary to them as maybe running for office. And so I think there's a lot of value, like you said, in building that coalition and deciding, okay, we're united as one and we're going to move forward. We actually have a ton more questions, but we do not have a ton more time. So I want to end on a light note. I'm going to open this up to everyone. If you want to answer it, just raise your hand. We have a Gen Z parent here with us and they want some parenting advice from you guys. So they would like to know what to avoid and what is conducive to discussing political opinions with your Gen Z, I don't want to say child because you guys are not children, you are grown adults, but for every parent, it's still a child no matter how old they are. So to your child, have you had discussions with your parents? How have those gone? What are maybe the landmines to avoid? And what are some ways to make it successful? Anyone want to take that first? If you don't volunteer, I'm putting you on the spot. All right, Onyx, let's go.
I'll hop in, Audrey. You know, interestingly enough, I think that a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of bipartisanship apply to conversations with anyone really. And I think that even within groups that are on the same side of the political spectrum, there is a conversation needed to be had about how do you have intergenerational conversations. And so I think that, you know, what works well in my household is everyone's opinion matters, right? And my mom has never kind of spoken to me in a way as if, you know, she was the authority. Like we had a dialogue and we learned from each other. And I think approaching the conversations with family members the same way that you would approach them with friends or peers or colleagues is super important. You know, at this point, everyone in Gen Z, we are adults. Some are still kind of approaching adulthood. We're still, you know, kind of engaging for the first time in politics in any event. And I think that it's super important that, you know, folks understand that we have political opinions and they're, you know, well-grounded in our experiences. And so we want to exchange and kind of discuss why do we have these political opinions and realize that, you know, we have reason to, you know, be the way that we are.
Yeah, so just giving it perspective, even if it is your child, treat them with the same respect as a peer and listen and don't condemn. Mikhail, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I'll add on just a little bit. Another thing that I think is really important to piggyback off of that is to realize that the way that your child is growing up, has grown up, is very different than the way the parent has grown up. And a lot of the ways and traditions and cultural situations that the parent went through, the child is experiencing in a completely different way. And so when you're able to understand that you have very different backgrounds, even though you're part of the same family and that is your child, you do have different perspectives on things, and to be able to realize that and that they are their own person with their own opinions and be able to listen to their perspective on it, because who knows, you might be able to learn something from each other at the end of the day, and that's exactly what we all want. So
I couldn't agree more. Well, Mikhail, Edgar, Cindy, Onyx, thank you so much for your time today. I think it has just been so valuable for all of our listeners. We had Hill staff on here, government affairs professionals, fellow students, and I guess parents too, who are just looking for advice to make sure that we're approaching these next 6 days wisely. So thank you. I'm going to invite Micah back on our team to close us out.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. College to Congress truly appreciates your attention to the opinions of Gen Z voters. Again, a big thank you to Onyx, Cindy, Mikhail, and Edgar for your insight and your perspective. We value and respect each of you and genuinely appreciate the time that you've used to contribute to our meaningful conversation. We really look forward to the chance to talking with emboldened and passionate members of the youth community again soon. If you have any questions, please email us at info@collegetocongress.org or follow us on College to Congress on Instagram at College to Congress and on Twitter at C2C_DC. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining us.
And go vote. Everybody vote. Vote early, vote often. Thank y'all for
Thank you.
joining. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.